Thus Zionism and imperialism and their discrimination towards the Arabs on the one hand, and inciting Arab nationalism and their opposition to the Turks on the other. Until this time, the Arabs did not consider themselves a separate race. But as the Turks were seeking the superiority of Turkish culture over other cultures, the Arabs, too, insisted upon their own independent identity. It was the racial and nationalistic policies of Young Turks that kindled the flame of Arab nationalism, a matter, which as we shall see, was directly supported by the British 11. After the revolution of 1908, the Young Turks expanded Turkish nationalism by force and by propagation through the mass media. Moreover, the repeated blows inflicted upon Turkey by Arab countries, together with the extension of Western education and dispatch of students to Europe, intensified Turkish nationalistic frenzy. Even some Muslim thinkers as Namik Kemal (1840–1888), Zia Pasha (1825–1880), and Jodat Pasha (1823–1898) tried hard to blend Islam with nationalism, an idea which was doomed from the very beginning since these two schools are incompatible. The progressive advance of nationalism and colonization at last led to the rise of Atatürk, accompanied by his anti-Islamic policy. With him, Turkey became totally dependent on the West, exactly what the Satanic West wanted. The Western intellectual class continued to promote this school, which was now supported by the bayonets of Atatürk and his successors. Ziya Gökalp (1876–1942), the greatest theoretician of the Turkish nationalist school, was a well-known personality of the West who busied himself copying Western ideas and culture, both of which he made the core of his ideology. Turkish nationalism resulted at last in the membership of Turkey in the NATO, thereby surrendering its political and cultural independence. This was then an account of the rise and advance of nationalism in Turkey. Sub British colonialism, the banner-bearer of Arab nationalism. 4. British colonialism, the banner-bearer of Arab nationalism. Nationalism was nowhere to be seen in the Arab countries before the inroad of Western ideas and colonial influence. Arab lands gradually came under the domination of the Ottoman Empire from the 16th century onward, and a unity was established between almost all parts of the Muslim Middle East, excluding Iran. All through the Ottoman rule, until the beginning of the 20th century, the Arabs had no feeling of alienation towards the Turks, and were perfectly content with the unity that existed between Turkish and Arab lands. They considered the Ottoman Sultan the rightful ruler of the Muslims, and the Ottomans, too, showed no discrimination towards the Arabs. They chose the governor of each Arab zone with the title of Naguib from among the people of the same zone. French colonization was the first to sow the seeds of nationalism and the separation of Egypt, to be followed by the deceitful and mischievous creation of Turkish nationalism by imperialism and Zionism in the form of the Young Turks movement, and leading for the first time to discrimination of Arabs by them. Concurrently, colonial powers, especially Britain, roused the racial and nationalistic sentiments of the Arabs through Christian Arab missionaries and Western intellectuals. After Egypt, the pioneers of Arab nationalism were Syria, Lebanon and Jordan. Missionaries were most active in these regions. Members of the Jesuit Catholic sect from 1830 and Protestants from 1820 entered Syria. The giant Christian society became the agent for executing the plot of colonization. Christian Arabs regarded Western penetration to their own interests, and looked at French and British colonization as a refuge against the Muslims. They were very sensitive about the expansion of the idea of the universal Islamic Ummah, since such a unity would place them in a minority, whereas having nationalism as the basis of unity would not only prevent their being considered a minority, since in such a unity all are Arabs, not Muslims and Christians, but being ahead of the Muslims as far as Western education was concerned and trusted by colonial powers, they hoped to assume the reign of affairs. From the beginning, Christian Arabs sought the aid of Western governments against Muslim Arabs, as was the case in the Civil War of 1860 when they invited the Europeans for a campaign in Lebanon. But this method did not solve the Christians' problem in the long run, since it roused the cynicism of the Muslims. Therefore, on the suggestion of their colonial masters, they resorted to the importation of the creed of nationalism. One of the clearest examples was Najib Azori, a founder of Arab nationalism. He was an agent of both France and England. In 1904 in Paris, he published a book named Le Réveil de la Nation Arabe. He further formed a society by the name of Ligue de la Patrie Arabe, and published a monthly journal named Independence Arabe, as an organ of the Union. In its publication, an employee of the French Foreign Ministry named Eugene Long collaborated closely with him. Long, as a servant of French colonialism, wrote a book named La Révolte Arabe, 12, in which he praised the Arab race. One of the points repeatedly stressed in this book was the racial, cultural and political differences between the Arabs and Turks, and occasional reference to the superiority of the Arabs over the Turks and the necessity of segregating the Arabs from the Ottoman Empire. To both Azori and Long, 3 revolutions would be necessary to destroy the Ottoman Empire: an Arab Revolution, a Kurdish Revolution and an Armenian Revolution 13. Azori's views on international politics, too, show his dependence on Britain and France. Against the Turks, he sought the friendship of Britain, and supported the pro-British party of Muhammad Wahidi and pro-British dailies such as El Hatatam and El Watan. He regarded the power of Germany, which supported the Ottoman Empire, a danger to human society, and considered the governments of France and Britain as the banner-bearers of justice in the world, and encouraged these 2 colonizing powers to interfere in the Ottomans' internal affairs in favor of the Arabs. He volunteered to start a revolution within the Ottoman Empire in cooperation with Long, with the aid of British and French capital and weapons. Dr. Hamid Inayat writes, Azori expressed his loyalty and obedience to Britain and France and introduced himself as the supporter of their interests in the East, and said, "The French should assist and tell us what they want from us." 14. Azori, as a founder of Arab nationalism, was dependent on the French and British governments and was in their service. 15. Besides Azori, there were such men as Petros Bostani, Nassif al-Yazigi, Ibrahim al-Yazigi, Nofel, Salim Nofel, Mikhail Shamhada, Semin Kalhoun, Gurgis Fayaz, Rostan Damshkia, and many other Christian enlightened men depending on colonial powers, who tried to incite and expand Arab nationalism. These men did their utmost to convince the Arabs that they were a distinct race, superior to other Muslim nations. They deliberately misinterpreted history to attain this objective and presented Islamic culture and civilization as being originally Arabic, a matter which was a great treason to the intellect. Their arguments and ways to prove Arab nationality came from Western culture and thought. Arab nationalism was reflected in 2 ways. Firstly, by emphasis on Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqi and other nationalities. And secondly, by emphasis on Arab unity, or the Arab race. During the World War I, the British government decided to enter the arena in person and to openly support and guard Arab nationalism, turning the enmity between the Arabs and the Turks to its own interest. The rise of Sharif Hossein, grandfather of King Hussein of Jordan, against the Turks in June 1916, which is regarded as an objective desired by Arab nationalism, was the product of direct British meddling and intervention. The expansion of Arab nationalism against the Ottomans brought the British and French governments into the Arab zone, resulting in the creation of Israel as a cancerous tumor in the heart of the Arab land. Sharif Hossein, as a pioneer of Arab rebellion against the Turks, was a British agent, and the British were the greatest supporters of Arab independence from the Turkish yoke. The story of Sharif Hossein's collaboration with the British as a hero of Arab nationalism is very amazing. In 1914, direct contact was made through Abdullah, son of Sharif Hossein and father of King Hussein, between Kitchener, well-known English general, and Sharif. Some time after, Kitchener sent one of his high-ranking officers, named Ronald Storrs, to visit Abdullah. At this time, the World War had begun, and Kitchener, who was now British War Secretary, sent a message to Abdullah in October 1914 asking him to rise in rebellion for independence against the Turks. Kitchener promised to support the Arabs' efforts for independence, and even to transfer the Muslim Caliphate from the Turks to the Arabs and choose Sharif as the new caliph. Sharif Hossein, this so-called reverend pro-British nationalist, carried out the plan of colonialism in the name of Arab independence, and at a time when Turkey was entangled with the British and French, he made an assault upon the Turks, rousing the Muslims against them and in favor of the British. McMahon, an English general, sent a letter to Sharif, the copy of which is in the archive of the British Foreign Office, in which Sharif Hossein's role is lauded as a determining factor in the combat for independence by the valiant Arab nation. On July 21, 1915, Sharif sent a message to McMahon, asking for British support for the Arab demand for the caliphate. On June 10, 1916, the Arab National Uprising, with the aid of British arms and munitions and military and political support, was started, led by Sharif Hossein. T.E. Lawrence, an English government official, was the principal advisor to Faisal, son of Sharif, in this national Arab uprising. On one side, the Arab forces rushed upon the Turks, while on the other, in a perfectly coordinated operation, General Allenby, the British commander in Palestine, took the lead in fighting. Thus the combat of the Arabs for independence incited by nationalism, was promoted under British military protection. But while British and French colonizing powers tempted the Arabs into a war of independence, and while Sharif Hossein and Arab secret organizations such as El Fatah and El Ahad were actively executing the schemes of the colonial powers, Britain and France were secretly dividing the Arab zones among themselves. With the Treaty of Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration, they laid the ground for the division of Arab lands and creation of Israel as a country. France occupied Algeria, Tunis and Morocco by inciting anti-Turkish feelings. Italy made Libya its colony, while Russia occupied parts of Armenia. Britain occupied Egypt, Cyprus, Aden, and the sheikdoms of the Persian Gulf, and then Syria, Lebanon and Iraq, culminating in the creation of the cancerous tumor, Israel, in the heart of the Arab world. And that was the painful story of Arab nationalism, its creation and expansion. Conclusion. It becomes clear then that nationalism in Islamic lands was incited by the Westerners, with the British and French missionaries and Orientalists having a great share in it. It was then expanded by colonial plots and used by colonialism as a tool for breaking up Islamic unity and destroying the Ottoman Empire. In this connection, Christian and Jewish minorities and pro-Western intellectuals were the principal executors of these imperialistic plans. Almost all the banner-bearers and famous pioneers of nationalism in Islamic lands were those who copied the Western values and ideals. With the inroad of Western ideals, words like homeland and patriotism became very popular with the Arabs, Turks and Iranians. Nationalism was the stealthy and motivated imitation of Western models, dictated by colonial powers, eventually resulting in the dependence of those countries upon the West or East. This fact that for many years the main supporters of Egyptian nationalism and Arab nationality and other Islamic nations were France and Britain is more eloquent than words. With those brilliant records of colonization, at present, the biggest supporter of nationalist forces of Turkey and Iran is the US, and the supporter of the Baathists and some Arab countries is the Soviet Union. The important question that arises is why the idea of nationalism, which penetrated Islamic lands through Western ideas and colonial plots, was welcomed by some sections of the Muslim masses, and how did it expand? Firstly, the masses could not see the difference between patriotism and nationalism, and to their unconscious mind, both concepts seemed to denote the same idea as that of Islamic Ummahism. From the beginning, Islam had created a strong feeling of the Ummah, and had divided the world into the House of Islam and the House of War. The masses believed nationalism to be the same as Ummahism, and therefore welcomed it. The reason was that even though the people sometimes spoke of nationalism, yet in practice, they regarded a Christian Egyptian and Coptic Egyptian beyond the sphere of nationality, and Turkish Armenians as aliens. Actually, to the masses, nationalism and Islamic Ummahism meant one and the same thing. Secondly, contrary to the main pioneers of nationalism, who propagated it as a result of their dependence on colonial powers and the West, the masses manifested nationalistic sentiments in opposition to social tyranny or to the colonial influence of Britain and France. To the masses, nationalism was a sentiment, not a school, but to the Western, so-called enlightened class and politicians, it was an ideology and a political creed. The third factor behind the growth of nationalism among the masses was the injustice of the selfish, pseudo-Muslim governments which inflicted oppression and torture upon the people. While the Ottoman Empire was on the brink of collapse, Turkish rulers, like other selfish rulers of history, treated their subordinates oppressively, including not only the Arabs but the Turkish peasants. After the Young Turks assumed power, tyranny and discrimination became prevalent, an outcome of Turkish nationalism, which led to a spread of nationalistic sentiments among the Arabs, of which colonialism made the utmost use. The most recent example of a country where nationalism is fully manifest is Bangladesh, resulting from the tyrannical conduct of Pakistan's military dictators.